Our guest returns for his second appearance on the Chaps, making him a fully fledged member of the Repeat Offenders Club. He has just returned from vacation, so we have literally grabbed him off a fishing boat somewhere in the sunshine. You know him best as the host of his fantastic show on YouTube, The Andy Staples Show. So therefore, no surprise to welcome back Andy Staples. Andy, hi, how are you?
I am wonderful. Yes, very refreshed after vacation. Happy to be back. This is going to be a fun talking season because I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen. And even the coaches and the players, when they start talking, we're like, they don't know what a 12-team playoff is going to look like. They don't know what these new conferences are going to feel like when you actually start playing in them. So I am ready to go to SEC Media Days and just be slapped in the face with a Longhorn logo and an interlocking OU and be like, oh yeah, the world has changed.
Well, it has changed dramatically, right? We were just talking before we pressed the record button about just what has. I can't remember a college football season where so much has changed in such a short space. But a great guest gives us a great segue into our first question, which is, well, this week, in fact, yesterday, we saw Texas and Oklahoma officially join the SEC, and there was quite a fanfare to be fair in both Norman and specifically Austin. So, Andy, question for you then about Texas and Oklahoma coming in, and I can't help but think that Texas have joined the SEC with something of a swagger, thinking they're the main guys. Do you think these two teams bring a breath of fresh air to the SEC? And the answer could be both here, or do you think this is going to be a tough season for both of these teams coming into the conference?
I don't think it'll necessarily be a tough season for either team. I mean, when we found out that Texas and Oklahoma were coming to the SEC, so this would have been July 2021. So at that point, Texas has fired Tom Herman. Steve Sarkisian has been there a few months. He's not coached a game yet. At that point, you're like, oh, the Texas of the past 10 years is going to struggle in the SEC. But the Texas we saw last year, which is what Steve Sarkisian seems to have been building up to, is going to have no problem in the SEC. I mean, remember, Texas went to the home stadium of the team that won the SEC in 2023 and beat them. So it's not like Texas doesn't have the personnel, doesn't have the know-how on the coaching staff to deal with this. They do. If this were the Texas of 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say, yeah, this is going to be an absolute shock to their system. And Oklahoma, I don't think they're going to be shocked by any of this either. It's not a great year to have to completely retool your offensive line, but that happens to teams. That's not a case of them not being ready for the SEC. They're as deep on defense as they've been in a long time. Everybody's excited about Jackson Arnold taking over at quarterback. They did get the harder schedule draw of the two. If we're being completely honest about it, Oklahoma, I don't think they have the toughest draw in the SEC. I think Florida still probably wins the prize for that one, but I think Oklahoma's is right up there.
You mentioned, well, George mentioned as well, the SEC. There's the changes in the SEC. We mentioned before we hit the record button, the Pac-12 is, as we know it, dead. Such change, drastic change across the college football landscape. I can't remember an off-season where there seemed to be as many coaching changes as well. New rivalries, new matchups that have never been played before, a 12-team playoff. What are you, as we sit here on July the 2nd recording this podcast, what are you most excited for about the return of college football, Andy?
I'm excited about a lot of the new conference matchups because I think there's going to be a lot of fun in seeing like Texas and Oklahoma playing these traditional old line SEC schools, or seeing Oregon and Ohio State and Oregon and Michigan, or USC and Penn State, USC and Michigan playing. I think those games are going to be really cool. I've had friends who are from Big Ten country say it's like we get all these Rose Bowls in a year, because that's what, like, a USC Penn State game was a Rose Bowl. Like an Oregon Ohio State game should have been Rose Bowl, Oregon Wisconsin Rose Bowl. And those are now regular season games. So I think that's fun. I think the Big 12 is going to be loads of fun just because of the way it's the way it's construed. I mean, you've got 16 teams. Everybody feels like they're kind of in the same place. And the Big 10 and the SEC are not like that. The ACC is not like that either. But it feels like in the Big 12, everybody's kind of equal. And it really depends on how good is your coach, how good is your quarterback. I think we can get up to double digits in counting teams that we think could win the Big 12. And very excited to see Utah play in that league now, because it's funny because 10 years ago in the Big 12, what Utah does and what the Big 12 teams do look nothing alike. But Utah comes into a Big 12 that has become kind of a ground and pound league. I mean, you look at what Oklahoma State does, you look at what Iowa State does, you look at what Kansas State does, and Utah's going to fit right in. Meanwhile, you got Arizona, where you've got Noah Fafita back at quarterback, you've got T-Mac T-Mac's Tataroya McMillan at Arizona, one of the best receivers in the country. Like, the fact that they kept him after Jed Fish left for Washington is a miracle. And I cannot wait to see him against these Big 12 defense. I think it's going to be so much fun. And I don't know who's going to win that league. And I feel like they're going to have good games on Friday nights too. So like, we're going to kick off our weekends on Friday nights and I realize it'll be very late for you guys, and I'm sorry about that. But Friday nights, where you have these crazy Big 12 matchups that are going to just, go into the weekend where you have games that will be relevant all year for a lot of teams because of this 12-team playoff. With the 14 playoff, it felt like all but about 6 or 7 teams were eliminated by the end of October. That's not going to be the case this time. We're going to probably have about 20 teams in contention into November. And I think that will change how we view a lot of these games.
Just as an extension of that, Andy, because you brought up the Big 12, and I've seen multiple people talk about the Big 12 this offseason. Someone, I can't even remember who it was on social media, called the Big 12 America's Conference, because it very much feels like there's something for everyone in there. There is this element of excitement. There is this, as you alluded to, there's this almost level playing field of competition between, maybe Arizona State struggles this year, but everyone else,
right?
Like, you feel like they're in it. Just as a quick aside from that, how good of a job has Brett Yormark done as the commissioner of that conference in bringing this conference to this point? Because where the ACC is having its issues, the Pac-12 is obviously, RIP. Like, the Big 12 feels like it's thriving in a way that few people expected it to.
Oh, absolutely. When Texas and Oklahoma decided to leave for the SEC, we assumed the Big 12 was dead. We assumed that it was going to fall apart. And now Brett Yormark has done a fabulous job. I do want to give some credit to Bob Bowlesby, the former commissioner, and I realize he gets piled on a lot for a lot of things that happened, but a lot of those things were out of his control. What he could control was understanding what was going on right after Texas and Oklahoma left. And I think picking up Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and UCF was important. That needed to happen. And then it allowed them to be in a place where they weren't weakened. They had a plan going forward. And Yormark takes over and is very calculated and smart about all of the moves he's making, and understood in a way that the Pac-12 commissioner, George Kliavkoff, could not seem to get across to his presidents, that they were in a kill or be killed situation. Like, only one of the Big 12 and the Pac-12 was going to survive. And the Big 12 understood it was in a life and death fight, and the Pac-12 didn't.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I'm looking forward to very much for the season is, and you talked about this, Andy, when we get to a certain part into October, November, the chaos that we're going to see about how the playoff is going to start to formulate. I think that's going to be fascinating. Right, so it is talking season. We get to talk about whatever we want. We're going to crown you commissioner of college football, Andy. But Ollie, you get to answer this question as well. So we do love a good season opener, and to be fair, some teams really do get into this in a good fashion. But you're the college football commissioner. You get to have your dream game for week 0, the first game kickoff. So your perfect matchup in the perfect location. Where would that be? What would your game be, Andy?
Well, it's not going to be a neutral site game. It would be on campuses. I would do a Big 10 SEC challenge. I would just matching up 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, 3 versus 3, and do them at the home stadiums. half the game. Obviously, 2 Big Ten teams have to sit it out because the Big Ten has 18 and the SEC has 16. But you do 8 games. You'd have 8 games, or I'm sorry, you have 16 games total. 8 games at each conference's home stadiums, and so like this year, depending on how you seed it, you get your Ohio State, Georgia, either in Athens or in Columbus. Your next game is probably Oregon and either Alabama or Texas. Either in, so let's say it's Oregon, Alabama. It's in Tuscaloosa or Eugene. Like, do it. And I know what you're going to say, but what we might see that again in the playoff. Who cares? Play good teams against other good teams. Fun things happen.
That would focus minds, wouldn't it? That would focus minds from week 0.
Locked in.
Penn State going to Death Valley. I can imagine the opposite year when LSU had to go to Beaver Stadium. I love that idea. That's a great idea. You should be the commissioner of college football. Ollie, you've got no chance topping that, but I wish you luck.
I really haven't. I think what would be awesome would be to see in week 0 2 of the best teams in college football playing arguably the best venue in college football. And Andy's already mentioned Oregon and Ohio State. Imagine Oregon and Ohio State in the Rose Bowl to open the season, like knowing that game is probably going to make or break both teams.
Do you want to have a conference game week 0? I mean, obviously there's a real conference game in Dublin week 0, so it's not too far fetched. But wouldn't you want it to be a non-conference game, like instead of Ohio State, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, or Oregon, Georgia?
Honestly, Andy, I love a conference game in week 0. And we had Nebraska Northwestern over here in Ireland in 2020. I lose what year it is.
2022. And you have it again this year. You have Florida State, Georgia Tech in a conference game in Dublin on week 0. So it's definitely doable. I don't see. I have a problem with taking the really nice conference game that you have. Like, so Ohio State, Oregon is an actual conference game that will be played in Autzen Stadium in October. I want that to be on a home field. I don't want that game on a neutral site. I don't care if it's the Rose Bowl. Like, I believe college football is better on campus.
Oh yeah. No, I don't disagree with that. I think if you as an opening spectacle, it's like the Soccer World Cup. Like, it always used to be the reigning champion that played on the very first game of the tournament, and sometimes they'd play someone terrible, but every now and again they would play an awesome team in that first game, and it sets the theme for the rest of the season.
Mm-hmm.
In kind of some respects, the same way that I know it was a very lopsided game last year in Dublin, but like Notre Dame Navy having that historical rivalry in Dublin. Like, I sat on the 50-yard line up in the press box at that game, and I was like, goosebumps, guys. Like, this is it. Welcome to college football 2023. And like, having a scene setter like that in a season like this, I think would be pretty awesome.
I agree, and I do think the week 0 thing, if we're gonna have week 0, let's just have more open dates during the season. Let people play on week 0. Spread the games out better so you can spread them out better from television. I don't have a problem with that at all. And just let's start with bangers. I mean, there was a few years ago when they did a Florida Miami game in Orlando week 0, and I thought that was a heck of a lot of fun. And the TV ratings backed it up. Like, everybody wanted to watch it. So I'm with you. I there's no reason to have to wait. Now, I do think we get some fun ones week 1. We get another Florida Miami one. LSU USC on that Sunday night week 1 in Las Vegas is fascinating to me, because you've got 2 teams where their offenses, they're losing Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, but both of them feel good about the quarterback that's going to replace that guy. Their offenses, you're not really worried about. Both defenses were terrible last year, but they think are going to be better. Like, that is a really fun game that we will draw so many conclusions from that we think are definitive. But in truth, we won't actually know anything about either team after that game.
Yep.
Yeah, I think back to the similar situation with LSU again, LSU FSU.
I was at that game.
That was an incredible week 1 Sunday night game. or Monday night game, whichever night it was. I can't remember. Boston College FSU, the first Monday of week 1 this year, not quite the same pedigree. We've talked about some exciting things that are being talked about. Let's talk about some exciting teams that maybe aren't being talked about quite as much as they should be. Andy, who do you think are some surprisingly quiet programs that are kind of flying under the radar, both from a media and a fan perspective as we head into 2024?
I'm not sure. See, I've been talking about this entire off season, so I feel like I've talked about everybody at this point. I don't know that anybody's actually flying under the radar, because I feel like we've been so starved for this that we've hit on so many different teams. I mean, you look at the betting favorites in the Big 12. Like I think K-State is a really interesting team, and Kansas State has Avery Johnson coming in at quarterback. Like, Will Howard is the starting quarterback at Ohio State because he transferred there because Avery Johnson was going to be the starting quarterback at Kansas State. I find that endlessly fascinating. And I think Avery Johnson can be really good. But I think the world's onto that. Like, if you look at the Vegas lines, like, Kansas State is one of the betting favorites for the Big 12 title. So I think people understand that this should be a pretty good team. Kansas, we'll see what happens. Like, is Jalen Daniels going to be healthy for the start of the season? Because if he is, they're a lot of fun to watch, like, and have been good. They were a 9-win team last year. So I came out with a video on Tuesday where I said I think Nebraska's going to start the season 7-0. And we've talked about Nebraska. Like, Nebraska gets a ton of offseason chatter every offseason because there's a huge fan base. It obviously dominates the news cycle up there. Everything is Nebraska football in Nebraska. And you look at the schedule that they open with. If they can get past Colorado in week 2, there's a really good chance that they go into the Ohio State game 7-0 or 6-1. And that would be so massive for Nebraska, which has not gone to a bowl game since 2017. This is a program that needs a year to happen like this. Now, I know the fans hate when I say this stuff because they're like, stop jinxing this. But their defense is awesome. I think they learned quite a bit from last season, where if you've got a really good defense, just take care of the ball. Offensively, they gave a couple of games away based on turnovers last year. You get those back, you would have been 7-5. Like, if you just take care of the ball, this could be a pretty good team. Now, it's interesting because I say they could start 7-0. They could realistically start 7-0 and end the season 8-4. It's entirely possible. Schedule gets really hard at the end. But can you imagine the hype train that would follow Nebraska if they're just winning over and over and over again in the first couple weeks, first couple months of the season?
Yeah. You can never accuse two teams from LA of flying under the radar, but you talked a little bit there before about USC, but what are your thoughts on USC and UCLA for the upcoming season? Obviously, UCLA have had a head coaching change. USC, I think it will be interesting to see how they start this season. What are your expectations for those two?
UCLA is a complete mystery with Deshaun Foster taking over, because very clearly he wants to reestablish high school recruiting as the cornerstone of UCLA's program building. Chip Kelly did not want to do it that way. Chip Kelly wanted to do stuff out of the portal. He didn't want to recruit out of high school the way everybody else does. And so Deshaun Foster is going to shift gears and do it in a more traditional way while still using the portal. But I don't know that we'll see what that actually means for them as a program for another year or so. This is them trying to, cobble together what they can after a very strange situation last offseason. So USC is a little bit different animal. We know what USC has on offense. Now, we think Miller Moss will be the starting quarterback. He looked phenomenal in that bowl game. Seemed to have command of the offense, seemed to have the respect of his teammates. You look at some of the guys they have on offense, like Zachariah Branch is one of the most exciting players in college football. I'm not worried about them on offense. I had never been worried about any Lincoln Reilly team on offense. The question with any Lincoln Reilly team is, what is the defense going to be like? Now, they fired Alex Grinch last year as defensive coordinator. They hired Dan Lin, who was awesome at UCLA. The question is, how fast can Dan Lin improve that defense? Will they be allowed to practice in a way that allows the defense to stay physical and tough and be able to tackle as the season goes on. Because I think that's been a problem for Lincoln Reilly Oklahoma teams and Lincoln Reilly USC teams, that as the season goes on, their ability to tackle seems to fall off. And they've got to fix that. They need to practice more like a Georgia does or like Ohio State does now. Ohio State kind of lost that for a bit too, but they seem to be back with Jim Knowles at DC. They seem to be back where they need to be. So they need to understand that it's a global program thing. It's not just we changed the defensive coordinator, and so it's going to automatically get better. They have to understand, you as the head coach, even as an offensive guy, have to help the defense with the way you practice, with the way you handle tempo on the offensive side. All of those things matter. But again, I'm not worried about them scoring points. So I don't know what they're going to be in the Big Ten, because if the defense isn't any better, we're talking about a 7-5 team. If the defense is considerably better, we're talking about a team that can make the playoff. And so those swing games are going to be really important. Like when they play Penn State, if that defense is better, they'll be able to beat Penn State. If that defense isn't any better, if it's been the same as it's been since Lincoln Riley's been there, then Penn State will beat them. And that's the part that I'm really interested to find out.
The one thing we do know is that expectations will be very high at USC, and the fans will expect a playoff spot as an absolute minimum. I'm not sure they do. Like the ones who like to argue with me, because they you look at their recruiting, they had some very highly ranked defensive recruits committed who have since left the class. Two of them have committed to Georgia. One of them, I don't believe, is committed anywhere, but they expect him to go to Florida. And I mentioned this on social media. I got USC fans say, well, it's about development. I'm like, no, it's really not. It's about both. You have to get the raw material and develop it. We know how it works. We see what Alabama does, what Georgia does, what Ohio State does. Like the goal is to just do that. And they'll say, well, it's not all about the national championship. I'm like, okay, really? Is that the tack we're going to take? Because I don't think that's how Ohio State and Oregon feel. No, and you're in their league.
At some point, it's about the national championship. Because if it's not, what is it about?
What's the point? Yeah.
Well, Lincoln Reilly's not getting paid whatever Lincoln Reilly's getting paid.
Correct.
To not win a national championship. And Clay Helton felt a hot seat for the longest time because he couldn't get to that point. So this leads us very nicely onto the next segment, which is not necessarily coaches who are on the hot seat, but whether you're buying into what they're doing at their programs, Andy. So it's a kind of buy or sell segment. And the first one is, and I ask Ollie his opinion as well. First one is Hugh Freeze at Auburn. We saw Hugh Freeze with his first season under his belt last year. Are you buying into what Hugh Freeze is doing in Auburn?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Hugh Freeze do this at Ole Miss before. He gets players that that weren't getting before. Now, Auburn has always been able to get top caliber recruits. Brian Harsin just did not make that a huge priority. But we knew when Hugh Freeze got the job that he was going to upgrade the talent, and he's definitely done that. The question is, how good are they going to be offensively? Year two, Peyton Thorne, it seems like he's still the quarterback. What we're going to find out as the season begins is it going to be Peyton Thorne? They've got Walker White, who's a freshman from Arkansas, who's come in. But the other thing about it is Hugh Freeze is not calling plays, and he didn't last year. And I don't know what it is about the water in Auburn, Alabama, that causes coaches who are really good at calling plays to stop calling plays. But Hugh Freeze is great at that. They will be better because Hugh Freeze is calling offensive plays. So you have that right now. They have a wide receiver who's a true freshman named Cam Coleman that I cannot remember this level of excitement for an Auburn recruit in a long, long, long time. And this is a guy who, at a position that Auburn's hardly ever good at, could change everything. So I'm very excited to see him play for real in a college environment, because I think that will help their offense quite a bit.
Right. Are you buying into that, Ollie?
I think we sat on this podcast this time last year when Hugh Freeze took the Auburn job, and he was doing such a good job of the charm offensive. He was saying all the right things. He was making all the right moves, and you're starting to see that, as Andy mentioned there, with a guy like Cam Coleman. You're seeing those, I don't want to say smarmy given Hugh Freeze's previous issues at a college football level, but that kind of that charm offensive is certainly paying dividends in the recruiting ranks. I think Auburn, rather than Hugh Freeze, they live and die by pace and form, and I think that could be the problem for Hugh Freeze. In all honesty,
Well, we'll soon find out. I called it the Peyton Thorne experiment last year, and I'm not sure it passed the muster in year one, but we'll see what happens. A coach who has had significantly longer at the program than Hugh Freeze had at Auburn is James Franklin. They just seem to be perennial, almost there teams. They're almost going to get to something or somewhere. With an expanded college football playoff on the horizon, there will be expectations that Penn State can do something. Andy, are you buying into what James Franklin's doing at Penn State?
I need to see what that offense is going to look like. So they hire Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas to run the offense, and he ran a very creative offense at Kansas. They're going to have to be more creative. Their offense was just boring, just plain boring the last few years, and it wasted what was a really good defense. They're going to have a really good defense again this year. They lose Manny Diaz. He becomes the head coach at Duke, but Tom Allen comes in. Tom Allen was the Indiana head coach. He's a phenomenal defensive coordinator, has been throughout his career. Abdul Carter is one of the best pass rushers in the country. They are going to be loaded on that side of the ball. I'm not worried about that. The question is, are their own fans going to be booing their play calling in the second quarter of a game like they were at the Michigan game last year? They have got to be more creative on offense. We've seen that happen under James Franklin when Joe Moorhead was the offensive coordinator, but they also had Saquon Barkley and Mike Gesicki in that offense. Trace McSorley running the show at quarterback. Can Drew Aller be that guy? Drew Aller has a great arm, prototypical pro body. He's a good athlete. He's really risk averse, and I don't know if that is a case of he's risk averse or he was coached to be risk averse, but that has to change a little bit. He's going to have to take some chances, and that may not necessarily go well all the time, but that's what gives you a chance when you're playing a team like Ohio State. Now, the expanded playoff can be a double-edged sword for Penn State because you look at what has happened in the recent past. So they would have made it 6 times since 2016 had the current playoff system been in place, which means they better make it this year in the first one. And if they don't, then you've got all kinds of problems. Then you're like, okay, well, we're just stuck in the mud here. So you got to make it in this first year. And it's not going to be that easy. The Big Ten is good at the top. You know, when you're dealing with Ohio State and Oregon and Michigan and USC, like this, Wisconsin's going to be better. This is not going to be easy. So they got to make it, though, because that's always been the excuse. Well, if the playoff was bigger, we'd make it. Now the playoff's bigger. Make it. Yeah.
It feels like it's a tough year for Penn State, Ollie, because of that very reason. I think that in other conferences where we've said that there's been some, cannibalism through the playoff structure, it's going to be dog eat dog in the Big Ten this year. Yeah,
and everything Andy just said is spot on. Like this is the thing for Penn State this year. They're all out of excuses. They've had we're stuck with Ohio State and Michigan in that division in the Big Ten. It's so hard to get to the championship game because we're in with Michigan and Ohio State. That excuse is gone. The playoff excuse is gone. James Franklin's had enough time. They're all out of excuses, and there's enough things outside of football that have been questionable about Penn State. But if you can't deliver success this year, I think that's the hot seat talk gets real for James Franklin. I think at the end of this year.
Yeah, I think it does. The other name I had on the list, who we seem to have talked about ad nauseum, is Lincoln Reilly at USC. I was torn between him and Billy Napier at Florida, but we'll stick to script. Andy, Lincoln Reilly, I think you suggested that there's no you've got no concerns about the offensive side of the ball, but defense is going to be the key to how successful USC is going to be this year. But are you buying into Lincoln Reilly? This is his third season at USC now. I've lost count.
I just feel like he's too smart to let this get away. Remember, he's still a fairly young guy. He's just turned 40. It's not like Lincoln Reilly is this grizzled old guy who will never change and is too stubborn to change. I don't think he's too stubborn to change. And it's about what I talked about, where you have to think more globally, try to help your defense more. I think he's smart enough to do that. It would be very disappointing to me if someone who is that much of a genius on one side of the ball would just continue to have that big of a blind spot. I think he's smart enough to figure it out. I think he's smart enough to get this defense straightened out, win lots of games, compete for national titles. I just find it very hard to believe that someone who's that intelligent and that young won't adapt.
Yeah, I think we're still holding a candle for Lincoln Reilly for the time being, anyway.
I think the thing with Lincoln Reilly as well is Andy hit the nail on the head with the youth element of it. He has still got time to adapt and adjust and rectify some of those mistakes. He can still evolve with the time. I think with Lincoln Reilly, and I put him in the same bucket as Matt Campbell, it feels to me like their opportunity to go beyond college football, as some people would look at it, to the NFL, it feels like that time has passed. So for guys like Lincoln Reilly and Matt Campbell, where else is they go to? And if you're USC, if not Lincoln Reilly, who's going to elevate that program for you that isn't Lincoln Reilly right now?
Somebody that recruits like Kirby Smart.
And is Kirby Smart going to go to USC?
Dan Lanning went to Oregon. He recruits like Kirby Smart.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, Glenn Schumann's going to be a head coach. He's the defensive coordinator at Georgia. He's going to be a head coach somewhere. He's going to recruit like Kirby Smart and like Nick Saban. Like, that's what he was trained in. And it's not a secret. Like, Michigan won a national title in a different way than what we had been seeing. But it remains to be seen whether that can be done over and over and over again. Michigan was an incredible development program under Jim Harbaugh. They did still get some guys that everybody wanted. I mean, Will Johnson, Donovan Edwards were guys everybody wanted. JJ McCarthy's a guy everybody, I guess, but Ohio State wanted. So they had some of those guys. And then they just developed incredibly well along the line of scrimmage and managed to get a lot of the people to come back for one more run, which feels a lot like Ohio State's defense this year, where they've got guys who would have been kind of mid-round NFL picks and would be in the NFL right now making good money. But they said, you know what? I want to give it one more chance at Ohio State. We're all coming back for one more ride. That's kind of what that feels like. The difference is Ohio State's been signing 5-stars all along. And so I think that competitive depth, that sheer raw talent, that's going to be more important as you have to win more games against the best teams in the sport. And you're going to have to win more games now to win the national title. You're going to have to be able to beat a team as talented as Georgia, as Ohio State, as Alabama to get where you want to go. Can you do that? It's very hard to do that without those kind of players.
Yeah. I think make a very good point about Glenn Schumann. It's going to be quite difficult for Kirby to hold on to him over the next couple of seasons. As always with a great guest, we run out of time. That's all from us on this episode. Andy, you touched a little bit on some of the stuff that you're working on, but tell our listeners what we can watch out from you in the coming weeks, where we can find you, all the kind of good stuff.
Well, I'm on the On3 Sports YouTube channel. Just subscribe to that. I have a new show Monday through Friday. let's see, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern time, which would be, I believe, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So tune in. We're always talking college football every single day. And then, I'll be writing stuff at on3.com, and you can listen in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts. If you don't want to watch my ugly face, you can just listen to my nasally drone. I don't mind. I'm happy as long as you're coming in one way or the other. So whether it's podcast, video, if you want to read my writing, you can find me at on3.com, the On3 Sports YouTube page, or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts.
Well, really appreciate you taking the time out, especially after your vacation. As you know, Andy joins a long list of truly awesome guests on this podcast. So if you haven't already, please check out previous episodes. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and subscribe. You can follow us on social media. We're all over the place. Our accounts are at College Chaps, so please give us a follow. Thanks again to Andy and Ollie for their brilliant input. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well. Catch you all next time.